Hi, I'm David Judson, Editor-in-Chief of Stratfor. With me today is Stratfor's chairman and founder, George Friedman. George, thank you for joining me. Just wanted to brief on your recent circumnavigation of the globe. Singapore, I guess it was a month-long trip, Singapore, Hungary, Moldova, Romania, Czech Republic, France, and Korea, an eclectic mix.
Don't remind me.
Yes. Anyhow, if you're sufficiently recovered from jet lag, out of those countries, out of that list, what was maybe the most profound in terms of observations that you were able to bring back?
I'd have to say Moldova.
Moldova.
Partly because it's so unique, and partly because it's on the edge of history. It is a country that is part of Romania culturally, under Soviet and Russian influence for a very long period of time, sitting on the edge of the Ukraine. You know, it is a place where every move by the Russians is felt. It's a place where every move by the Romanians or by the Americans is felt. But it's a small country in the sense of you sort of feel a generation before when you're there. The people are, the ones that I met were educated, sophisticated, capable people, but they're trying to determine their future.
And they're right at the cusp of the sort of one of the main centers of volatility in the world right now.
Right.
What's the mood?
Well, the mood for the moment is that much of their fear of what the Russians would do may have been overstated. The Russian retreat from the Ukraine hasn't yet sunk in, but they're beginning to realize that the wind is blowing from the west, and particularly from Romania. In a way, their own mood shifts as the regional power structure shifts with them. And so that's what's interesting about it. It almost doesn't have its own identity. Its identity is imposed by the forces around it.
Moving into the neighboring countries, Hungary, Romania proper, and Czech Republic, can you contrast the views of what's going on and reactions to the volatility there?
Well, I mean, it's fascinating to see the differences between the three. Romania has clearly opted for a closer relationship to the West. It is opening up its markets and its minerals and its energy to Western exploration. It's committed to developing its military capabilities. Hungary appears to have tilted toward the Russians. Why? I guess it has to do partly with when they were making their policy. Russia seemed in the ascendance. Europe is in chaos, and the Americans are far away. Prime Minister Orban made the decision that he had to deal with the Russians. Be interesting to see as events occur if he changes that.
Well, there was reports emerging today of this stress checks of the European banking system that resulted in scenario exercise of what would happen with a full gas cutoff from Russia, and the most vulnerable country it appears to be emerging in that scenario is Hungary. Do you think that has anything to do with it?
That certainly had a great deal to do with it. Hungary cut off natural gas to Ukraine while I was there, actually. And they're highly sensitive to this problem. What's interesting is that we've always thought of Europe as being extremely vulnerable to Russian cutoffs. In fact, in the Czech Republic, in Romania and elsewhere, we discovered they were quite prepared for it, that they expected a cutoff, that they were ready to cope with it, and so on. Bulgaria, Hungary are in a different position. That will explain, a great deal of what they do. But I think the takeaway is that the assumption that these countries don't have reserves,
right,
really turns out, it seems to turn out not to be true, which may explain why the Russians really haven't done it yet. But there is a feeling among all of them is that sometime this winter, the Russians will cut it off.
Pull the trigger, yeah. So we'll see whether it's a flush or a busted flush at that point. Pivoting to the other side of your trip, to separate visits to Korea and to Singapore.
In countries I visited in Europe, the discussion was about Germany and about Russia. Here, the discussion was about China and occasionally about Japan. There's still a sense of the overwhelming presence of China. There's an awareness of the weakening of the Chinese economy. But what from the distance we see as a kind of fundamental shift in China's ability to control the economy, in neither Singapore nor Korea did I get that sense. They still felt they had to take China into account more than anyone else. In Korea, Japan was another factor. And so, the difference is, you think about the world, one world, all the same. No. In the countries I visited, the discussion was about Russia and Germany, and nobody cared about China. In the countries of Asia that I visited, the discussion was China and Japan, and nobody cared about Russia and certainly about Germany.
Okay, but you've got an interesting piece up this week that argues there's a certain similarity between the European crisis evolving around powerhouse exporter Germany and its peripheral economies, and a similar kind of dynamic in Asia. While these two regions are kind of maybe intellectually aware but not particularly concerned about the other, the dynamics of changing economies at the center affecting their relationships with the periphery are interestingly, surprisingly, very similar. Any thoughts emerging from that?
A very similar process is taking place in two regions of the world at the same time.
Yeah.
In some ways, you can see them as linked, but the most important part is that we're now in a world. We used to talk about, a single world and, globalization. We still have that. But Asia behaves differently than Europe. At the same time, they're having the same problem.
Right.
And the same problem is one great power at the center, economically, being in trouble. And how do they cope with that great power?
A certain parallelism in globalization. I'm not quite sure what name we could give to this phenomenon, but it's interesting to observe.
I would call it, distinct world systems.
Uh-huh.
And I think it just happens that they're in the same position. Yeah. I'm not sure that we can argue that there's a linkage.
Right. Okay. Well, an interesting topic, and maybe we'll return to explore it in some more detail next opportunity. Thank you very much, George. Thank you for joining us here at Stratfor.